A large office in a megalopolis skyscraper glowed with cold neon lights when Dasha, a young and ambitious marketer, received a new assignment. Her boss, the dry and demanding Mr. Green, solemnly handed her a thick folder. "This is your chance, Dasha. One of our new properties is a small restaurant in the province. It is necessary to carry out rebranding, to create a new image so that it becomes profitable." Dasha looked at the name of the restaurant, Zatishok. Something familiar flashed through her mind, but she pushed the thoughts away. "One more thing," added Mr. Green. "This is your hometown, isn't it?" Dasha froze. She hadn't been there in over 10 years, since she had left for university and a career. The small town seemed to her a part of another life. "Yes," she barely uttered, lowering her eyes. Dasha's hands froze on the keyboard. This was her hometown, which she had left many years ago. Everything is in the past there. Friends, school memories, and first love. She quickly pulled herself together. Dasha was a married woman, and her life had long revolved around her career and the man who was waiting for her at home in the metropolis. "Okay, I'll take care of it," she replied, trying to hide her excitement. A few days later, Dasha arrived in Zelenodolsk. The small town greeted her with familiar narrow streets and quiet charm. The restaurant, called Zatishok, was not only a part of the corporation, but also a part of its own past. Dasha was standing at the door of her apartment trying to fasten her suitcase, when the voice of her husband, Alexei, broke the silence. "And why do you need this business trip?" he asked, crossing his arms over his chest. "Hasn't anyone else been found in your company?" Dasha tried to remain calm, but felt that the conversation was escalating again. It was not the first time when Alexei arranged a similar scene before her work trips. "Alexius, this is my job," she explained. "I was chosen because I am the best fit for this project." "Do you fit best?" His voice was filled with sarcasm. "What about us? Are you suitable for this marriage if you are always missing somewhere?" Dasha sighed. She knew that these arguments were caused not only by her frequent business trips, but also by the fact that Alexei seemed to feel that their marriage was gradually losing intimacy. "I'll be back in a week," she said, trying to reassure him. "This is an important task." Alexei sighed and turned away, but resentment was visible in his eyes. "I hope it's really worth it." He threw over his shoulder before walking into another room. In the train, Dasha looked out the window, losing track of time. Her thoughts were torn between the work that lay ahead and the strained relationship at home. She knew that Alexei had become more jealous and suspicious lately, but she couldn't understand why. Arriving in her native town, Dasha felt a wave of nostalgia. She hadn't been here for a long time, and the memories flooding back were mixed with a sense of anxiety. She hoped that work would help her to distract herself. The small town greeted her with familiar narrow streets and quiet charm. The restaurant, called Zatishok, was not only a part of the corporation, but also a part of its own past. When she first entered the restaurant, her heart sank. The interior had hardly changed since she had visited it with her school friends. But an even bigger shock awaited her when she saw the owner of the establishment. "Dasha, is that really you?" heard a familiar voice. In front of her stood Maxim, her first love. His eyes glowed with wonder and warmth. He had changed but remained the same Maxim she remembered. "Hello, Maxim," Dasha tried to smile. "I didn't even think that I would meet you here." He invited her to sit at one of the tables, and the conversation began. "How is your life?" he asked. Dasha hesitated, but answered honestly. "Good. I am married. I live in a metropolis. I work in a large corporation." "I'm glad for you," answered Maxim, but there was a hint of regret in his voice. Dasha also couldn't resist the question. "And you? How did you become the owner of this restaurant?" Maxim said that after the death of the old owner, he bought the establishment in order to preserve its atmosphere. "This is not just a business for me," he said. "This is part of our city, part of our memories." Dasha felt something warm and familiar returning to her heart, but she quickly dismissed those thoughts, reminding herself of her marriage and responsibilities. Days passed, and Dasha spent time in the restaurant, talking with customers, learning the processes. Maxim was often around, helping her to understand the uniqueness of the institution. One night, when the restaurant was closing, Dasha stayed behind to help Maxim with the papers. Work was just an excuse to stay longer to be with him a little longer. They sat at the table, bent over documents. But their thoughts were not at all about work. Maxim carefully raised his head. His eyes met hers. There was more to that look than just fond memories. It was a longing, a deep, unbridled one that had built up over the years. "You've changed, Dasha," he said quietly, but his voice seemed so close to her. She flinched a little at his words, but did not look away. "And you too, Maxim. But you still have something that I no longer have. Sincerity." This phrase came out so unexpectedly that even she herself was surprised. Maxim didn't seem to want this moment to end. He raised his hand and touched her fingers to her palm. "I've always regretted letting you go then," he admitted. Dasha swallowed air, trying to find words, but could not say anything. Her thoughts were confused. She's married? She has to be faithful? It's just a job. But every part of her heart screamed that she wanted to stay here. "Maxim, it's not possible," she whispered. But he had already taken a step towards her. She felt his warmth as he gently placed his hands on her shoulders. His touch was gentle but sure, as if he was afraid she would disappear if he let go. "Dasha, tell me now, should I stop?" he asked, leaning closer. She didn't answer. Her heart was beating so hard that she seemed to be the only one who could hear it. All reasonable thoughts left her. When their lips met, the world seemed to disappear. Time stopped. It was a kiss that mixed years of longing, the pain of lost youth and forbidden feelings. She knew it was wrong, but she couldn't stop herself. They stayed in the restaurant for a few more hours, forgetting about everything. He gently ran his hand through her hair. She hugged him as if she was trying to hold on to this moment forever. Their closeness became ardent, passionate, and even the night that surrounded them seemed to witness this explosion of feelings. Waking up in the hotel room, Dasha felt the weight of her actions. Her heart beat faster as she remembered the events of the previous evening. Maxim was next to her in every thought, but her soul was torn by doubts and feelings of guilt. The phone rang and she answered without looking. It was Alexei. "Dasha, how are you?" His voice was warm but full of suspicion. "Everything is fine. I'm working," she answered, trying to keep her voice even. "Did something happen to you?" he asked. "No, just a lot of work," she answered quickly, hanging up the phone. She couldn't listen to his voice anymore. There was only one thing on her mind. What had she done? Dasha went out onto the balcony, hoping that the fresh air would help her cope with the chaos in her soul. But instead of peace, she saw Maxim waiting for her near the restaurant. His presence both warmed her and made the situation even more difficult. Dasha stood on the balcony for a long time, looking down at Maxim. He was standing outside the restaurant, leaning against the door, looking straight at her. There was tenderness in his gaze, but also confidence, as if he had been waiting for her to come down. She could not resist this desire for long. After getting dressed, she went outside. Her steps were slow, her heart beating so hard it seemed that passers-by could hear it. "I knew you'd come," Maxim said as she approached. "Maxim," she began, but he interrupted. "No need for words. Everything is written in your eyes." He took her by the hand and led her along. They walked through the narrow streets of the town in silence, as if they were afraid to disturb the delicate balance that held them together. Maxim led her to the place they once called their own, an old wooden bridge over the river. Here they once dreamed of the future, told each other secrets. Now this place witnessed their forbidden intimacy. "Why are you here, Dasho?" he asked, looking into the water. "This is work, Maxim. I was supposed to come—" she began, but he looked up and looked at her in such a way that her voice trailed off. "No, why are you here now? Why did you allow yourself to stay close to me?" She was silent because she did not know the answer. All she felt was a powerful whirlwind of feelings that could not be explained. "Maybe because I don't know who I am anymore. I lost myself. In marriage, at work. And you remind me of who I used to be," she finally said, barely holding back tears. Maxim approached her, took her face in his hands. "You are still the Dasha I knew. You just forgot about it." He pulled her to him, and she couldn't resist. Their kiss this time was not restrained but passionate, like a flame that finally broke free. Her hands slipped around his neck, and she forgot about everything, about marriage, about duties, about morality. All that remained was this moment, this man, this impulse. They returned to his house, and the night was a continuation of what had begun at the river. Everything was like a dream. His touches, kisses, his whisper of her name. Dasha felt something inside her change. It wasn't just a physical attraction. It was a longing for what she was missing so much in her marriage. He looked at her in a way his husband hadn't looked at in a long time. He touched her as if she was the only one in his world. And even though she knew it was wrong, she didn't want it to end.
"You know I've always loved you,"
he whispered as she lay on his chest.
"Maxime, no need,"
she answered, but her voice sounded too weak. "No, you have to," he said. "You should know that you have always been the one for me." Dasha closed her eyes, trying to stop the tears. Her heart was torn between her feelings for Maxime and her duty to return to her husband, who was waiting for her at home. Early in the morning, Dasha woke up when the first rays of the sun broke through the curtains. Maxim was still asleep. His hand was carefully placed on her waist. She looked at him, feeling how hard it would be to leave this place. She quietly got up, dressed, and left the house. It was quiet outside, only the birds were singing in the treetops. Dasha walked to her hotel. Every step was accompanied by pain in her chest. Returning to the room, she saw several missed calls from Oleksiy on the phone. Her heart sank. She knew that this day would be the beginning of a difficult choice: to remain in a familiar but empty routine, or to risk everything for the feelings that had rekindled in her heart. Dasha sat in the hotel room for a long time, staring at the phone. Her fingers slid over the screen, hesitating whether to call Oleksiy back. Every missed call reminded her that she had betrayed not only her husband, but also her own principles. Finally, she dialed the number. The phone rang, and Oleksiy answered almost immediately. "Where were you? Why didn't you answer?" His voice sounded alarmed and a little angry. "I'm sorry, I was busy." Dasha knew how weak it sounded, but she couldn't think of anything else. "Are you busy? Even on a business trip, you can't find a few minutes to talk to your husband?" His words were like a blow. "Oleksiy, please, let's talk when I get back," she said, trying to stay calm. "No," he snapped. "What is happening to you? I feel you drifting away. What's going on here, Dasha?" She panicked. She was afraid that Oleksiy felt more than she wanted him to know. "Everything is fine. It's just a lot of work and I'm tired," she replied, trying to sound confident. Oleksiy paused and then said, "Good, but we'll talk when you get back, and I want you to finally tell me the truth." He hung up, and Dasha felt her heart tighten again. She could no longer avoid thinking that her marriage was falling apart at the seams, and that Maxim had managed to open that part of her heart that Oleksiy had not touched for a long time. That day, she decided to avoid Maxim. She concentrated on work, met with the restaurant staff, made plans for the corporation, but no matter how hard she tried, thoughts about him haunted her. In the evening, Maxim still found her. "We need to talk," he said without asking permission to sit next to him. "Maxim, I can't go on any longer," she said, lowering her eyes. "Why, because you are afraid?" His voice was calm but full of pain. "I am married, Maxim. I have responsibilities." "Duties?" he asked, leaning closer. "And what about your heart, Dasha? Is it also in this marriage?" Her words stuck in her throat. She couldn't answer because she knew he was right. "Listen," he continued, "I don't want to ruin your life, but I also can't ignore how we feel about each other." "It's wrong, Maxim," she whispered. "Was it right to live all these years without happiness? Is it right to betray yourself?" His words echoed in her. She felt that the balance on which her life rested was finally collapsing. The next morning, she woke up with the feeling that something had to change. She looked in the mirror and barely recognized herself. She needed to decide what her future would be. She went to see Maxim, deciding that this would be their last conversation. When she saw him, her heart shuddered again. "Maxim, I've come to say goodbye," she said firmly, though her voice trembled a little. "If that's what you really want," he replied, "I won't stop you. But tell me, are you leaving because you love him or because you are afraid to love me?" This question made her stop. She didn't know how to answer. Her life was full of contradictions, and she understood that the choice between Maxim and Oleksiy was not only a choice between two men, but also a choice between two different parts of herself. I don't know, Maxim," she admitted. His eyes filled with pain, but he nodded anyway. "Then find your answer, Dasha. But know that I will always be here." She left the restaurant feeling her soul being torn apart. Now she faced the most difficult choice in life. whether she will remain in the familiar but cold world or take a risk and choose a love that can destroy everything. Dasha packed her things in a suitcase and looked at her hotel room for the last time. The business trip was over, but the relief she usually felt after completing a project was absent this time. Her heart remained in Zelenodolsk, although her mind insisted that it was time to return home. Maxim did not come to say goodbye. They agreed not to see each other again. This decision was painful, but the right one. The train sped through familiar landscapes, and Dasha looked out the window, trying to organize her thoughts. She returns to her husband, to the life that should be her home. But now every part of this house seemed alien to her. When she finally arrived home, Alexei met her with a tense expression on his face. He was waiting for her at the door, arms crossed. "Finally," he said, barely holding back his irritation. "How was the business trip?" "Okay," she replied, forcing a smile. "Okay, you don't even look happy. What happened?" Dasha put the suitcase by the door and sat down on the sofa. She felt her tension rise. The man was right. She couldn't look happy because all her internal struggles had left her exhausted. "Nothing special, just a lot of work," she said, but Alexei felt that she was hiding something. "Dasha, I know you. What's wrong with you?" His voice became more serious. She sighed, lowering her eyes. "Alexei, I'm just tired. Sorry if I seem distant." The man leaned closer to her, his face full of worry. "We've been drifting apart for a long time, and now you came back completely different. What happened?" Dasha was silent. The words did not come. How could she admit that her heart remained with another? "You're not going to tell me anything, are you?" he asked, leaning back on the sofa. "Hey, Alexei, I just want some peace. Please," she answered quietly. He sighed and stood up. "Good, but we cannot ignore it. We'll talk when you're ready." Alexei went to the bedroom, leaving her alone with her thoughts. Dasha spent the rest of the day unpacking her suitcase and returning to her usual routine. But everything seemed gray and empty. Her thoughts constantly returned to Maxim, his eyes, touch, voice. She tried to force herself to forget him, but it was impossible. In the evening, when Alexei fell asleep, Dasha sat by the window, looking at the lights of the city. She took out her phone and opened the photo of the Zadishok restaurant that she had taken before leaving. Her fingers instinctively typed the message. "I miss you. How are you?" She stared at the screen for a long moment before closing the message and turning off the phone. She lacked the courage to send him. The following days passed in a blur. Alexei tried to bring intimacy back into the relationship, offered dinner at a restaurant, conversations about the future, but Dasha felt that all this no longer mattered. One evening, sitting at the table across from her husband, she realized that she could no longer live in this vacuum. She needed to decide what her life would be like. "Alexei, we need to talk," she said, looking at him. He paused, placing the wine glass on the table. Finally, he answered, "I'm listening." Dasha felt her heart tighten. She knew that the most difficult conversation of her life was ahead. Alexei looked at her. His face expressed readiness for conversation, but also a little fear. Dasha mustered all her strength to say what had been on her heart for a long time. "Alexei." She paused, gathering her thoughts. "I can no longer continue to live the way we live now. This is not what I want. I feel that I am moving away from you, from what we were building, and I can't hide it anymore." Alexei did not answer immediately. He just stared at her as if trying to understand exactly what she was trying to say. "You're not happy, are you?" he asked, his voice softer but no less painful. Dasha nodded. She felt her heart break at the fact that she was about to end this chapter of her life. She already knew that she lacked a real connection with Alexei, and understood that he also missed her. "It's hard for me to say this, but I can't be with you if I don't feel what I'm supposed to feel. You deserve someone who will be with you completely, and I just can't play this game anymore." Alexei remained silent. His eyes turned dark as night, and Dasha felt that each word was killing him a little more. "You mean it's over?" he asked with an expression as if trying to protect his heart. Dasha looked down, trying not to disturb her already fragile balance. "I don't know what will happen next, but I can no longer continue to live in deception, neither to you nor to myself. There is nothing left between us. I met someone else." She felt every word weigh heavily on her soul. It was a decision she had been putting off for a long time, but now she couldn't deny it. Alexei bowed his head and sighed. He sat in silence and then slowly got up. His face became serious, remaining calm even though his heart was obviously beating faster. "I know who you're talking about," he said without looking at her. "You can't hide it from me." "You have changed, Dasha." Dasha did not know what to answer. She felt guilty, but at the same time she was sure it was the right thing to do. She had no choice but to move forward and decide what was really important to her. "I really didn't know what would happen next, Alexei, but I can't be in this marriage anymore. I chose a different path for myself." She stood up, feeling her legs grow weak with more pain to come. "Do you want a divorce?" Alexei still looked at her. There was brokenness in his voice and perhaps unspoken fear. "Yes, I can no longer live the way we live now. I must go forward." Dasha left Alexei, going to the room where they often discussed their plans. It was difficult for her to deal with what she felt and what she had to do. She had hurt her husband, and it was unavoidable. She felt thoughts of Maxim still creeping into her heart, but she knew she needed to clear that understanding to understand what would happen next. The next day, she got up early, went to work to leave all the questions behind. After she made an important choice, Dasha felt her soul begin to calm down a little. Although there were still many unknowns, her decision was clear. She had to leave everything behind to figure herself out. And although she couldn't say exactly what would happen next, she knew that now she needed to be alone. She decided to find temporary housing, an apartment that she could rent for a few months to give herself time to think. It was not an easy step, because leaving Alexei, who cheered for her decision, was difficult. But she understood that she could not move forward until she found herself. She could no longer live under the burden of obligations and other people's expectations. When she told Alexei that she was going to live separately, he accepted it with tears, but with understanding. They had no more life together, and what had happened between them could not be undone. "You mean we won't be together anymore?" His voice trembled, but there was also understanding in it. "You're not going to leave me forever, are you?" Dasha looked at him, trying not to break down. She couldn't make promises she wasn't sure about, so she simply replied, "I need time to understand what I want, and I don't think staying together will help me figure it out." Alexei just nodded silently, letting her know that he understands her desire, even if it hurts him. Dasha rented a small apartment in the city center. It was a modest place, but it was exactly what she wanted. No frills, just a clean space where she could breathe. The first few days were difficult because she felt lost and alone. She spent a lot of time in thought, walking around the city, trying to reconnect with herself. The absence of Alexei around for a while allowed her to look at everything from a different perspective. She began to realize that her life path cannot be built only on what others expect of her. She had to find herself, understand who she is without these obligations and roles that she took on. But importantly, she also felt that she lacked a sense of freedom. Because despite the fact that she decided to break up with Alexei, her feelings for Maxim still did not give her peace. She tried to stay away from him so as not to aggravate the situation, but if she was honest with herself, she knew that at the moment her heart remained torn between the two people. A few weeks later, when Dasha began to calm down a little, she met Maxim in the city. They were facing each other, and it was almost unexpected. Maxim was calm, but his gaze still held the same depth she felt when they were together. They were silent for a few minutes, and then he spoke first. "You're still not ready for that, are you?" Dasha looked into his eyes, and at that moment she realized that her heart was really not ready. "No," she said quietly. "I'm not ready. I haven't figured it out yet." Maxim took a deep breath and felt a sense of burden fill her soul again. He understood that Dasha must go this way on her own. "I'll wait if you want," he said, but his voice wasn't demanding. He simply gave her the opportunity to make her decision at any moment. Dasha nodded, and they quietly left. This brief moment they spent together was another step towards coming back to themselves. She decided to give herself time, without any pressure or expectations. And although she still didn't know what would happen next, Dasha felt that she was on the right path, on the way to herself, to understanding her feelings, and understanding who she is and what she really wants. And only after that, she will be able to decide what to do with everything left behind. Dasha spent her days thinking and searching. She decided to devote this time to herself, her feelings and her desires. The first few weeks after the divorce from Alexei were the most difficult. She began to realize more how much time she had spent on a relationship that no longer brought her joy. However, every day she became more and more convinced that she had done the right thing by choosing time to think. She started going to yoga, visiting museums, reading books, for which there was always not enough time. Dasha rediscovered the joy of simple things, walks in the city, the taste of good wine, conversations with people whom she had not seen for a long time. She felt her heart and mind being cleansed of everything that had once filled her life. But at the same time, she felt how difficult it was to leave behind what happened with her and Alexei, especially considering everything that connected them. Naturally, she thought about Maxim from time to time. He was a part of her life and remained in her heart, although she tried not to let her feelings completely take over her. She needed more time. One evening, when Dasha returned after a long walk, she saw a message from Maxim. He wrote, "I understand your need for space, but please remember I'm here if you want to talk." Dasha thought. Her hand hovered over the phone screen. She felt an attraction to him, but at the same time, she understood that now was not the time for it. She has not yet completed the process she started with her own life. And though her heart yearned to answer, she decided she would be honest with herself. A few days later, she replied, "I appreciate you, Maxim, but right now I need to be alone. I'm not ready for that, at least right now. Thank you for understanding." Her heart ached a little, but she knew she had made the right choice for herself. She was still not ready for a relationship, even if it was Maxim. She had to go this way herself. A few more months passed, and Dasha increasingly realized that her inner harmony was returning. She was no longer what she was before. She had changed, and these changes were important. She decided to visit several new places, travel to learn more about the world and herself. One of the trips brought her to the Carpathians, where she spent a week climbing a mountain, listening to the silence and thinking about her life. It was the time when Dasha finally accepted herself, with all her mistakes, doubts, but also with the hope for new beginnings. When she returned, her inner peace had changed. She started working again, doing what she enjoyed, and began to find new interests that had previously been shelved. Dasha met people with whom she found common views, and gradually regained contact with everything she once lost in pursuit of other people's beliefs. But despite all these changes, she was in no hurry to settle her heart again. She realized that the most important thing is to be honest with herself, and then, if everything works out, come to something new. And whether it would be Maxim or another person, she was ready to accept it when the time came. Dasha was no longer what she was before. She now knew that she needed to take more care of herself and not be afraid to be alone until she found her true path. Only now she felt that she was ready to restore her heart, take her time, and listen to herself. And when Maxim was not around the next time, she did not feel fear. She felt only peace, the peace of someone who has already found himself, who already knows how to be happy alone, so that in the end he is ready for something more.